So, yeah, starting this thing off, how exactly would you describe what it is that you do? Why do you do it? And yeah, anything else about modern Kriya that you want to give us, and then we can get the ball rolling.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, so my approach is I teach an evidence-based trauma-informed approach to spiritual development, and it incorporates the ancient wisdom and teachings of Kriya Yoga and Daoist Internal Alchemy, as well as current understandings in neuroscience. And so Kriya Yoga has it's been around for a long period of time. It was sort of became predominant in knowledge or prevalence in the late 1800s in India. Was a fellow named Lahiri Mahashai or Lahiri Baba. Who was the teacher and taught many people in Benares this Kriya Yoga, and he learned it from his teacher, this Babaji. And so Kriya Yoga is, my approach builds on Kriya Yoga. It builds on Daoist Internal Alchemy. And I initially had no inclination to teach at all. I had been, learning these practices for decades, right, and very involved in them. And several years ago, I teach meditation as part of. I work for the government in Canada, and so as part of a kind of commitment to trauma-informed practice and self-care, I implemented this meditation, like morning meditation program for the staff in government, in our particular branch. And I brought in some of the teachings and my understandings of Kriya Yoga into a distilled version that was really about trying to teach people the basics of how to meditate with no background at all. And one of my students came to me at the time, and I had trained several facilitators to do this work as well, right? So we had like morning meditations basically throughout the week for staff for like 20 minutes. And we've been doing that for like 5 years. But one of my students came to me and said, hey, you've got so much to say. You have a definite opinion on everything, right? It's really meditation or whatever. Have you thought of teaching more broadly? And I was like, well, no, I haven't. And they said, well, yeah, there's, means to do that, right? Like maybe you want to get a YouTube channel or whatever. And so anyway, I talked to my Kriya Yoga teacher at the time. And I said, yeah, you do have a lot to share. So I give you my blessing. And so go to it. And so that's what I started in March of 2021, where I just started putting out videos primarily about Kriya Yoga and stuff like that. And I wasn't really sure the direction I wanted to go with it. But the essence of it is that I wanted to share practices that I knew worked, approaches that I knew worked. And I knew there was a lot of misunderstanding out there about meditation and Kriya Yoga in particular. And so to try and clarify some of the things that I had learned to save other people the time and the heartache that I had gone through to try to, where I just couldn't make my way around certain obstacles because I was just doing the same thing over and over again. So I'm like, we need to demystify things so that people understand what meditation is and how easy it is. And, and I've had many people, especially when I was teaching the meditation for the government and so on, that people would come to me and say, I can't meditate. I've tried it. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work for me. And so I was like, okay, great. Because what have you been doing? How have you been doing this? And a lot of times people have been doing things like just following the breath, which is sort of a simple, Buddhist meditation that's used in other traditions as well. And I'd say, well, yeah, that worked in 1950 because the breath rate of humans in general was below a certain threshold. So if you follow the breath, you would start to get into a meditative state. If your grandfather, your great grandfather was sitting on the back porch somewhere and just watching, the sunset, they would naturally go into a meditative state. But the breath rate of humanity in general has increased like threefold, I think, since then. So we're breathing at about 12 to 15 breaths per minute in general, a resting breath rate. And if we just follow the breath, we cannot get into a meditative state that way because we're not leveraging our parasympathetic nervous system in a way to get us into meditation. Mm-hmm. So Kriya Yoga has been had a very direct way to apply an intentional breathing that brings about that meditation, that unfoldment. And so I wanted to bring that back into sort of everyday consciousness of people who weren't even like really meditators, but were just sort of interested in the benefits of meditation, and say, here's a really simple way that you can learn to get into a meditation. And boy, does it feel good when you're in there, right? So just try it, like 5 minutes, the proof is in the pudding kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the impetus of the way that I've gone through and sort of where I've ended up. And I never envisioned being a teacher in this regard or anything, but it's taken on a life of its own. And I've connected with some really amazing people. I've got students all across the world. And just to hear some of the challenges that they run into, and I'm like, oh, great. Okay, here's a unique problem. Let's look at ways that we could potentially solve it together, right? So that I love working with people in that way, because people come from all sorts of backgrounds, and I want to help them. And sometimes I don't know the solution, but we'll try some things, and I try and teach them like foundations, fundamentals, and understanding the principles on the way things work. And sometimes we're able to find solutions together. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Like, it's very fulfilling in that way. And so, yeah, that's basically it in a nutshell.
That's awesome. So how would you describe Kriya and the fundamentals of Kriya and the principles and the modalities of Kriya? Somebody that really doesn't know any better and they have no idea what Kriya is. And I know it can be, it can be pretty deep, but if we can keep it a kind of a simple approach to Kriya, like how would you describe that?
Okay. Well, basically, Kriya is one of the most effective means for getting into a meditative state or having a meditative experience. And it uses a form of intentional breathing. So you're guiding your breath, right? You're intentionally doing a certain kind of breathing. And what that does is it has an effect on your central nervous system, particularly the parasympathetic nervous system. And when you stimulate with this slow intentional breathing, which is basically what Kriya Yoga is, when you stimulate that parasympathetic nervous system, what happens is you start to have a physiological effect. Primarily, or at the very beginning, your heart rate starts to slow down. And what happens at a physiological level is this: you bring your breath below a certain rate of breaths per minute. So it's 7 breaths per minute to get into something that's called heart rate variability, right? Where your breath and your heart rate starts to come into resonance with each other. And it slows down your breath rate, right? And by slowing down your breath in this way through this intentional breathing, you actually do something to the medulla oblongata, which is in the brainstem. It controls autonomic functions of heart rate. So by doing Kriya Yoga, you actually start to slow down your heart rate, right? We can't control our heart rate consciously, right? It's autonomic function. But by doing this type of intentional breathing, Kriya Yoga and its derivative, what we teach is heart rate variability resonance breathing. It's this sort of distilled version of Kriya Yoga that focuses on the fundamental principles of Kriya. By doing this intentional breathing in this way, you actually slow down the heart rate, right? And then your body starts to go into a low idle state. You start to get internalized, and you will start to experience, and normally people who are just like starting out and don't do anything, don't know about meditation, and we guide them in this heart rate variability resonance breathing. And in 5 minutes, they start to experience signs of the galvanic skin response, which is also called the freeze response. It's a physiological response in the body, right? That where your parasympathetic nervous system is becoming predominant. So you can feel things like your hands might become to feel hot and heavy. Mm-hmm. You may feel a pulsation in your lower lip. You may have tingling throughout your body. All of these are signs that your parasympathetic nervous system is becoming predominant and you're going into deep meditation, right? So you don't need to have a background in any kind of spiritual tradition or religious beliefs or anything to get benefit in this way. Just doing this slow, intentional breathing brings you into a meditative state. And as I say, the proof is in the pudding. Mm-hmm. You have the experience and you're like, whoa. I recently had a student who joined me, as a new student, and she had been doing, her background was different modalities of meditation, et cetera, and also an interest in Daoist studies and so on, and was somewhat familiar with that stuff. But she had never heard of Kriya Yoga, and she hadn't heard of heart rate variability resonance breathing, and so she was asking me about Daoist practices, because I also teach those, right? Daoist Internal Alchemy, which has a sort of embodied approach to spirituality. And she asked me, she's like, oh, what about this heart rate variability and the Kriya Yoga that you're teaching? I said, yeah, it may not be of your interest, right? But, check out the lessons on that and, let me know how it goes. She's like, oh my God, I had no idea that meditation could feel like that, right? So she just followed the simple practices of doing the intentional breathing, Kriya Yoga, or the heart rate variability resonance breathing, just this a distilled version. And she's like, I had an immediate effect of that. So it's like, great. These are evidence-based practices, like they work, right?
Yeah.
So if you've never heard anything about Kriya Yoga, there's a lot of information and mythology about Kriya Yoga as being the most advanced spiritual path and all this kind of stuff. Like, sure, it's good marketing, right, and that kind of thing. And certainly people who are inclined to spiritual development and have sort of a devotional component can use Kriya Yoga to enhance their spiritual relationship, if you will. But you can also use it to just have a meditative experience where you don't have to worry about all the sort of spiritual cultural baggage, believing in this or believing in that. You will have that experience unfolding naturally, this sort of natural spiritual experience, if you will. Spiritual is not really the best word for it. It's a natural unfolding, right? And we usually, I think in these societies, and most societies, we don't really put an emphasis on that too much. It's seen as something that you do maybe on the side. I have my religion, I have my spiritual whatever, but you don't think of it as embodying it in your everyday experience, right? Yeah. That's kind of the approach that I take, is like, use a few techniques, start to get the experience of it. And if you just do heart rate variability, resonance breathing, or you're doing Kriya Yoga, you will start to have an internal experience that has a sort of, it's natural unfolding of you, and it can feel very liberating and very spiritual. And you may be then, as things start to unfold within you, you are like, whoa, I had no idea that was inside, right? Mm-hmm. It's wonderful. So it's really to give people a few tools that we know work to start exploring their inner vistas and see what's in there. And if they have a bunch of like religious tradition and they want to explore that, totally fine. And if they have none of that, it doesn't matter. Like, they will have something unfolding within. So that's really what it's, that's kind of what it's all about. And I also, in addition to Kriya Yoga, I also teach the Daoist Internal Alchemy. And I talk about that as an embodied spiritual art and science. It's what that is. It has a particular practices to get you grounded in your body, right? Often in meditation and some spiritual traditions, they want to like go within it and get out of their body. They want to sort of escape from the suffering, right? This sort of the idea. Yeah, exactly. Transcendence, right? And that's fine. But you can't, if you leave things behind, there's things unresolved. So actually what you want to do is have an embodied spiritual experience, meaning that your body, the substance of your body, your emotions, your mind, all of those things start to become integrated, that there's this embodied spiritual development. It happens from the center of you, right? And your body really is sort of the center of your existence on this physical plane, if you will. So we want to have spirituality or spiritual development, or just development, transformation, to start to come from within, not just like we need to go somewhere and we want to go escape the wheel of incarnation or whatever, ideas that people have, that you actually have it here in the now. And the benefit of that is that when you start to have those experiences unfolding within you, you start to integrate. You have this integrative experience. So we all have past experiences where we may have, some challenges, we may have trauma, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of the times those things are kept very separate within us in this labyrinth of unresolved state, right? We actually want to integrate that stuff so that we can have a cohesive whole, right? That's what really internal transformation is about. And I know that a lot of people they think like, whoa, that's too much. Like, I don't know about that. But we all need to have some integration within us to become functional and practical in life. So these kind of practices help to encourage that. And people can take it as far as they want. If it's that they want to have an experience of going within and just feel peace and stillness, right? If it's that there's something that comes up in their meditation, a strong experience from the past, like an emotion thing, and they're like, oh, it's just sitting there and it was never resolved. And they have an opportunity then for that to unfold, to transform internally. That is very liberating. So that's kind of the approach that I take with it. I say, like, just go down the rabbit hole because you will find more than you had anticipated, right? With very simple practices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so would you say it's more so about creating a lifestyle, a yogic lifestyle out of the practices and modalities? Like, yes, we may actually have transcendent experiences, um, very divine experiences, some may say. But eventually, hey man, you come back down and you're still in your humanly form and you gotta do things as a human. So would you say having these experiences ultimately the goal would be to create a better human experience, you know? So it's to create like it's to take whatever you physiologically do to the body in these meditative practices and translate that into our regular life to create a better just life altogether.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. It's about integration, right?
Yeah, that's the
I know
word.
in some cultures, things are more integrated. Relationships between the generations, different generations of people, like older or younger, are more integrated. And in the West, we tend to keep things a bit more siloed, which
Mm-hmm.
it's maybe it's efficient because we don't have to deal with too many things at one time. But it also creates this sense of separation in all these different aspects of our life.
Yeah,
And it's a challenge because like you're Joe at work, and then you're Joe at home, and then you're Joe with your friends, and so on and so on. And really, when you're able to break down the internal barriers, there becomes this harmonious integration through all aspects of your life. So as you said, it is about making yourself, well, did you say more functional or more kind of connected in the everyday? We
yeah,
want to
the
unfold from
lifestyle of
within.
it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I don't know that lifestyle is really like it's. I mean, for me, lifestyle is like trying to take on a persona a little bit. Meaning that like, okay, I'm doing these things and I become this type of person. But in actual fact, you can never really leave your history behind. So what you want to do is to come to terms with it and integrate it so it's functional in your everyday experience, in your now, right? In the experience of today. And so the lifestyle then is really about getting quite connected to who you are in the world and with your own self, and allowing the integration just to like people will feel the authenticity of what you're saying or how you're behaving because you've worked through a lot of the internal stuff that was unresolved. And then once you have the integration within, right? Because it's never really stops. It's just like once you get fairly substantial integration within, you start to have harmonious. You have a harmony. A harmony starts to manifest within, and then the harmony starts to manifest without, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
First thing is usually relationships with other people, right?
Yeah.
Situations where you're not reacting because the patterns that you have within, which are leading to the normal reactivity, have been resolved. So you're like,
Yeah.
okay, great. Now that pattern is outside me, but resolved inside of me. Is there something I can do with my internal resolution that helps to harmonize externally the pattern? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that is like an integrative process that just begins within and starts to spread without. So that's for me really what spirituality is about. But yeah, so the lifestyle thing, I don't know if it's a lifestyle. I mean, I guess it kind of is, but not in the way where I would think, oh yeah, I've joined a yoga club and now I'm like a yoga guy, right? That
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it transcends that.
I know what you mean. Yeah. Yeah, not in the sense of the popular idea of lifestyle, the cultural idea. Yeah.
And not to knock that at all, because I think there's some really vital stuff within people like in isolation approaching a particular lifestyle, kind of lifestyle approach, because there may be some particular things that they need to resolve. And through doing that activity or connecting with those type of people, they work on that in an intense way. And I know I have done that, like for instance, with Kriya Yoga, right? Like intensely doing Kriya Yoga for numerous decades, all of that stuff. But at some point I realized it's really about, sure, those are like training wheels, but where the rubber hits the road is the integration. And that doesn't have boundaries, right? It needs to not have boundaries. So yeah.
Well said. Yeah. So at a very practical level, it's really just about us becoming better, more cohesive, more maybe sattvic decision makers, so that we maybe don't react, but we respond. We respond a little bit wiser to any given situation in our life to make it maybe like you said, yes, a little more harmonious, maybe, so it's not destructive to others and yourself. It's really just becoming wiser. It seems like the spiritual path, um from a lot of things we read online, it may seem like we put a lot of woo woo and a lot of fluff into it, but when it really comes down to it, man, it seems like it's just like refining our character. It's like we do these practices, we figure out what's going on deep inside, and we work it out in one way or the other, and then we just refine ourselves to become, for lack of a better word, a better person. Would you say that's a pretty apt, simple description?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the sort of the mention of sattvic or more harmonious with others is really a byproduct of an internal process rather than trying to become those things, right? Because there are, like in yoga, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras talks about sort of this eightfold path, right? The first two parts of that are something called yama and niyama, right? The moral do's and don'ts. And a lot of spiritual paths will use an approach where they're like, we need to build your character, right? And certainly if there's no character or anything, you want some sort of guidelines for behaving, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're behaving from an integrative perspective. It may mean that you're just trying to be nice or you're trying to be more tolerant, and that there's nothing wrong with that. But what we really want is to those behaviors, the manifestation of those behaviors, harmonious with others, etc., are a manifestation of an internal process, a byproduct, right?
Yeah.
And so we know, like if you've encountered people who have considerable experience in spiritual development and so on, you'll be like, wow, they're like a cool person. They're like really nice. Like if you've ever interacted with the Dalai Lama, you're like, oh my God, like he doesn't care about the rules and so on of Buddhism for majority of people. He's like, just give me he's like, I saw once and he's like, I just want your smiles. Right. And we're like, great, because the smile starts to break down the barrier between us as, personalities, if you will, and encourage this connection. Right. And so he was at that level where he's just like, you're like, wow, he's what you see is a result of his internal process. It manifests as his virtuous behavior, what you will, rather than trying to be
right.
Yeah, exactly. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's interesting. The orientation that comes about from these practices is an authentic, it's a genuine, coolness. It's a genuine, it seems to be gentleness in somebody's character, a harmlessness. Some may say just love. Love just sprouts from somebody. But yeah, we don't try. It seems to be like there's no trying. It's just like our natural state seems to be when we get off the clutter and the layers of the ego, one may say. It seems like our natural state is this calm, cool, and collected, harmonious embodiment. It's interesting to me. I don't think it's a guarantee. There's definitely a lot of people that have abused their power and abused their insight. We don't have to go down that rabbit hole. I don't think it's a guarantee, but I think there's a very large correlation with that. It's not a causation, but I think there's a very large correlation with people that follow this path and just like the natural character that comes from the path per se. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's really, it's that people are, the integrative process, as we were talking about, really does manifest that harmony and so on. But I would say that there is a tendency, I think, in spiritual circles to kind of, obviously, with traditions that are coming from, South Asia, et cetera, to sort of revere the teacher as this sort of, great, developed being that is, you cannot question. Well, you could question, but you're not on the same footing with them, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge with that is that people who haven't been integrated enough as teachers and were put on a pedestal are maybe it's the opportunity to act in ways that are sort of contrary to what we would expect is there. And so because I think the integrative process within, like, that's going to happen continuously. We need to continue to do that. It doesn't just stop. One doesn't become enlightened and that's it. enlightenment is a process rather than a final goal. You need to go through that continuous internal transformation, which is not just about the physical body, the emotions, the mind, and all that, but goes beyond. It connects with our kin, right? Our ancestry, with our community, with our world, et cetera, et cetera. It has there's much wider range of that integrative process that needs to happen. And so enlightenment is a process of refining, if you will, like in Daoist Internal Alchemy, they talk about cultivation, right? Which is a nice term, or refining. And we also talk about refining sort of the inner elixir, like things that are unresolved, that are in the states of these patterns that restrict our ability to use our life force and attention in a spontaneous way, because they redirect it to the same pattern over and over again, hence manifesting the same behavior. Once those get resolved, the behavior doesn't manifest. So you just need to continue to work. And so I would say that there are instances, there are definitely people who are sort of very well developed and so on, will also do things like have resistance to something. They may have to take action. They need to be dynamic. Isn't just all peace and love. There are certain things that need to be done sometimes, right? Because this is the best, or one of the best situations, one of the best approaches to affect something that is going off the rails somewhat. So I think people's definition of what they consider sort of spiritually developed is often a little bit thin. And if somebody is really, I think, who develops more and more, they become more dynamic and causal, rather than just being, oh, it's all peace and love, and we're gonna, it's all love and joy. Like we are facing some major problems on the earth. We are facing some major challenges, with our own experience, right? And we have centuries and centuries of programming that has come to us through human social organization. That is, some of the stuff is not in the best interests of humanity or the planet. And so those patterns are still within us. And so we need to work on those as well. Now, that's usually out of the scope of what most people are even interested in. But that's the fact, is that it's in there and it's having an effect, but we don't realize it. It's at an unconscious level. And so we want to, when we're opening up our own inner space and starting to work within in our own sort of inner laboratory, if you will, we have to become aware of those patterns as well. And so, yeah, that's kind of the direction that I see things need to go.
Yeah. Yep. It's all about the patterns, man. We're creatures of habit. It's just
Definitely.
about building the right habits, knowing that, first of all, we do have habits and that we are a creature of habit. And then you identify what your habits are, and then refine the habits little by little. That's the thing, is Rome wasn't built in a day. So it's like, this path, it seems to be something, I was going to say lifestyle again. I'll try to avoid that, but it's more of something that we just take on as an embodiment in our life. And it doesn't happen just like this, even if you do get some kind of insight of enlightenment per se. If anything, that's the beginning. Once you do get a perspective of a sense of being connected to a greater whole, if anything, I feel as though aligning to that greater whole in one's life and embodying that is just the beginning of the journey. If there is, I know there's no beginning and end if you really want to get to the absolute level, but in this model, it seems to be, for me, once one gets a glimpse into through these modalities, gets a glimpse into just outside of the box that was built for us in our lives, outside of the box of the ego per se. Once you get a glimpse, I feel as though that's the start. That's the start of something bigger. And I have to say this, it's a start that I feel like once one gets on the wavelength of, it's like you can't go back. I feel as though personally, it's like once you do these things and you have these feelings that you never really felt before, there's no other way. I feel as though there's no other way to live my life. You know what I mean? Like, I can't go back into the matrix per se.
Yeah, true. It's a good way to put it, for sure.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, man. It's like the way is the way is the way, man. You can't, once one introduces oneself to this said way, it's like there's no other way. It's quite interesting.
It's
Yeah.
the way of nature. Like
Yeah.
the term Tao means the way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then Tao Te Ching is like the way, or um, the way and its virtue. And so that's an acknowledgement that these are natural. It's natural. Like there's a
Yeah.
naturalness to it. And so I think when you scratch the surface of different spiritual traditions and people who start to go into those and start to sort of experiment or suss them out, and without getting confused by what they've been told, they start to say, wait a minute, there's a natural underlying order to
Yeah.
things. And it
Yeah.
can begin with my internal perception, which
Yeah.
is totally cool. Because then you're like, okay, sure, you can use this approach or that approach. But if you understand the fundamentals of the way things work inside, then you're like, it doesn't matter. All I need to do is to get to that trailhead, if you will, to get to that start where you're just like, yeah, well, I've been introduced to this and I'm going to explore this internal vista, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, which is totally cool.
Now, would you say it's quite simple as well?
Well, getting to that trailhead is simple for sure. You can do it with there's different modalities, right? Kriya Yoga is an effective way to start to experience that internal vista. The challenge, I think, is that integration, we have so many things that are repressed in us, that are suppressed, not just our own stuff from childhood, but also programming that we've learned and so on. That's these sort of strata of patterns that are unresolved. So it's work. And that's what I realize is like, people think, oh yeah, I can just have a great internal experience. I'm like, yeah, you can have that. But what you will also see, it's not all puppy dogs and fairy tales in there. You can run into some very challenging stuff.
Yeah.
And it's yours, right? It's yours to resolve. It's yours to work with. You have that unique destiny of having it there within you. And you have a opportunity, which I sort of see comes from the universe, to work on something that is not just about you, but is about bigger humanity, or bigger at a global level. And so there's a great opportunity. I find it very exciting because I'm like, wow, I'm part of something. What I do internally and the way that I interact with other people and so on matters because it manifests, right? What do they talk about? Like the butterfly effect kind of idea, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's really great. You know, you drop a you drop a pebble in the pond and the ripples go outwards and you know it's affecting the field, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a great opportunity just to think, yeah, what I do internally actually matters. It isn't just me running away to get some inner peace. It's me running away to get some inner peace and then realizing all the stuff in there and going, whoa, I want to make a difference for myself and others, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we save ourselves to save the world.
Yeah, it's a great way of putting it.
I think that's what I meant by simplicity. It's that, you know, one person isn't going to save the world, but in a way, the one person saving themselves is the best thing that we can do to save the world. So in that way, I see it as quite simple. And yes, it can get complicated, the things that we have to work out, but in the basis of it's all up to you. I don't know. It's simple in that way. You know, it's all up to me. That could seem daunting, but then also I feel like on the other side of the coin, that could seem empowering. Like, yeah, it's all up to me.
Totally. It's super exciting. It's super exciting in that way, which I think is fabulous. I mean, it may be that just your human experience, you don't tap that potential. And then you do what you do and, you know, try and just sort of, you know, like you make whatever difference that you're making or connections with people and you feel, okay, you know, and then people pass on and those patterns in their ancestry don't get resolved. And then if there's a next generation, then they're like, oh yeah, here you go. Here's the work to start again. But if you actually take the opportunity and say, hey, I want to do something with this, like, whoa, think of the impact for your generations, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, subsequent generations or, you know, even right now. So I find it tremendously exciting in that way. And also it helps, I think, to kind of give you a bit of a purpose or refocus in life, because often, you know, we don't really know when we're younger, like what we even want to do or where we should be going and all these influences and so on. And we never really have an objective assessment of what we could potentially do. Nobody ever takes us aside and says, hey, okay, in addition to what you've been told about school, work, et cetera, blah, 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 there's also this internal vista within you that you can explore and might actually give you impetus for a direction in your life. Normally that doesn't occur. What normally happens is that people will go through existential crisis later on and go, I don't know what's going on. I'm not happy. And then, they may find means for, resolving some certain things. But if they're learn to cultivate an internal awareness, the knowledge about their sort of direction, if you will, inner impulse or whatever, will start to manifest. And then, but maybe not at a conscious level, but I need to do this kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is, if people have the opportunity to start to be exposed to that and become aware, that is a real hope for me for humanity, because then people have additional information that they did not have before at a conscious level,
mm-hmm.
and they can then have a choice on how they want to live their life, right? It's an option just to explore, to enhance everything else, and continue the great work that they're doing, but a possibility that maybe they weren't aware previously.
Yeah. Yep. Well said. It's this like certain intuitive purpose that one can tap into, and that's what we all need. I feel as though the majority of human beings, and speaking personally, I feel like we lack a sense of purpose, like true purpose outside of material means, purpose outside of a paycheck. That's not even purpose. That's just like a means to survive. But that's where we have been told our purpose stems from. It's like, that is it. Like, that's the pinnacle of purpose. It's like your survival in a way. You're getting the nice car, getting the validation, getting things. But quite contrary, it's like not negating that stuff. That'll come along the way. That's just part of the humanly experience. But true fulfillment, true purpose, it comes at a deeper intuitive level that one just has to tap into. And it's pretty much like, it doesn't come from the outside. It's all within, man. And I'm pretty sure that's cliche and we've all heard it before, but it's the truth. Like you said, the proof is in the pudding. Once you do tap into this intuitive guidance, you could say, you know. And once you know. So it's like, I wish I could give that to people, I wish I could just like give that insight to people. But it's not even as easy as just saying it, like, which just kind of seems a little like, it seems a little hypocritical on a podcast, because that's what we're doing. We're saying it, but it's really not that easy. Like, one just has to do it themselves and realize it themselves. So let me ask you this: what would you say is if you could generalize it, like the greatest what's the word I'm looking for? Incentive. Like, what incentivizes somebody to follow this path and get aligned to that kind of intuitive guidance within, when they say like, oh, I've had enough of the outside. There's got to be another way. What do you think gets people on this wavelength?
That's hard to say. I think it's actually a global pattern. Part of it is being facilitated now through global communications, right? So internet, etc. We didn't have knowledge like this readily available in decades past. If you go back even 2 decades, Kriya Yoga is very esoteric and well guarded by these lineages, right? Yeah. Where like you need to be formally initiated, you need a vow of secrecy, all of this kind of thing. And we see this in other traditions as well. And part of the reason for that was there, people who shared information like this, because it is revolutionary in a way, were persecuted. And we've seen this through, many centuries, right? Mm. So especially with religions that were connected with the state, you persecute people that don't fall in line, that they're talking this sort of revolutionary spiritual talk or whatever.
Yeah, the heretics.
Yeah, exactly. You go back to, Christ, you go back to even in China with Taoism and so on. You go back to, so Christianity becomes state instituted by Constantine in whatever it was, the 4th century, and so on, as a means to say this is the official unified version of this. And so I would say now what is happening is that with more communications and more information out there, people have this huge sort of spiritual marketplace, if you will, right? For lack of a better term. But I think that's not just about technological revolution. I think there's something behind that, an impetus with the earth itself of
Mm.
needing to make change
Yeah.
and make people aware, because we have been, uh, obviously you had feudalism, right, in across, the world. Then, you had imperialism and so on. And then, and now, you had the rise, United States separating from Britain and so on, and colonies starting to declare independence and so on. That is part of sort of trying to break the chains of control. But those chains still continue obviously the world economic structure, right, is subjugating people to a degree, and certainly having a very huge impact on sort of what we consider the developing nations, right, and so on. And so I think that partly the result of the challenging global conditions and environmental conditions, et cetera, other challenges, that it's just an opportune time for a lot of this information to just be available everywhere. People have so much at their fingertips with all these different traditions, and they're becoming less traditional now because they're trying to share insights. There are people teaching all sorts of, yoga, meditation, blah, blah, spiritual, this and that, and out there. And it's just vast information. And I think that it's coming at a time where people need to have access to that, and they're making choices about what they're doing. And it can be, I think, very daunting for folks because there's so much out there, and like, I don't know where to start, or I'm overwhelmed and so on. But I think that this is a process that just needs to happen, and people are going to find areas that work for them, right? They're going to resonate with something. They'll try a few things and they're like, oh, okay, well, this makes sense. Oh, this actually works for me. Okay. And then they start to have, as you said, that sort of inner unfolding. And then, so I would say that it's all part of the same ball of wax, if you will. I think this needs to happen right now because we need to get ourselves in order, if you will, or go through a process of resolving things that we couldn't resolve so that we can make more intelligent decisions in the future for ourselves, for humanity. So I think it's really part of the whole, like where we are in the world right now. And it's a great thing that so much is out there and available, but we cannot guarantee that it will be like that in the future, because we have seen successive cycles of openness and control. So we can't just assume like, oh, wow, it's 2023 and, this is great, all this information. We can't assume that we're not going to be subjugated again, and then we won't have access to this kind of stuff. So I'd say, I urge people, use the time now. This is like a spiritual revolution or not a revolution, a renaissance, if you will. So much available through information. Like, take advantage of it now. We never had access to information like this before, and now we do. So it's a great opportunity. So let's not waste it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that kind of sort of where I see sort of things sitting currently.
Yeah. No, amen to that. Yeah, we live in wondrous times. All of this, like you said, sacred knowledge that was confined to just a select few is now out in the open, and anybody can truly become the yogi. They can become the alchemist of their own being. Yeah, you have to sift through some of the shit first, to be honest, but it's out there. It's out there. The truth is out there. And thankfully, because of people like you, man, I feel from you very pragmatic in your approach to this. Because Kriya Yoga and yoga, the yogic lifestyle altogether, can become very airy-fairy at times with some explanations. But I feel like with a keen eye and a keen way of explaining it, it can become very practical and relatable. So I think that's your path, man. It seems like that's what you're doing. You're doing a good job of it, to be honest with you, man. So I bow to you in that. I applaud you in that.
Well, thank you very much for that. And, I can only take partial credit for clarifying Kriya Yoga. Like I add my own take to it with my own experience. But my teacher, Forrest Knudsen, right? So we're in the Panchanan lineage of Kriya Yoga. That was Lahiri Baba's preeminent disciple. Forrest Knudsen has really demystified Kriya Yoga, right? So he coined the term heart rate variability resonance breathing. And the understanding that you could just use something that is very simple to understand, very practical, and apply it and get results, right? So, but I mean, it's not just for us. There are many people out there that are just trying to demystify their particular tradition and give people something that they can experiment with and see and get some results, right? So I think there's a lot of synthesis of knowledge right now between different traditions, because people are getting best practices from here and there and going, wow, it works like this and this one works like this. What if we put them together and see what happens? That's my approach with Kriya Yoga and Daoist Internal Alchemy, right? Something I put together called Alchemical Kriya, where it brings the best practices of both of those for a more like a multiplier effect for a practice. So that's kind of where my interest is currently, at least. But acknowledging for sure that a lot of people, maybe just need to understand some, or it could be beneficial for people to understand some fundamentals about the way that meditation works, the way that spiritual development works, the process, to explain the process, so that then they can understand the principles and then use whatever toolkit they want to get results for them personally, because it's all individual. We're not all the same. We don't follow, like, it's not a 12-step program to spiritual development. You just start to find things that work for you and understand how they work and where they work in you. And then you have your own self-directed journey, your own self-directed process, your self-directed process, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of, that's where my interest lies.
You know what's cool too is the proof is in the pudding, experientially, subjectively, but also nowadays we have the proof as in we have scientific data, and that's what's cool. So it's another added layer to the demystification of these practices. Is literally you could, seeing is believing, especially in our world. You can see the results at a physiological level on how it changes up our biology essentially, and that's really cool, especially in the paradigm that we live in, in our culture, when you can see something. A great, for instance, is Wim Hof and the stuff that he's done in terms of scientific data. It's huge, because you can't deny that stuff. Like, there's really, you can't deny those results that have been tracked from people that aren't really yogis per se, like scientists of data. You can't fake that. So I think that is huge to the, it's a huge plus, I guess, to the renaissance that we live in. It's like, not only is this information accessible to a lot of people, but it's also it's quite believable, because we have proof per se. It's cool. It's a cool time. What a time to be alive, huh?
Absolutely. And I really appreciate an empirical approach to things, right? In looking at stuff. And in my own approach, and one of my teachers is Michael Wynn. He's like a great, grandfather of Daoist Internal Alchemy, if you will. And his approach is very experimental, meaning that he's got all of these sort of ancient knowledge, ancient formulas, right? Alchemy formulas and so on. But he's always experimenting with them and saying, okay, what if we do it this way and let's see what happens, right? So I really love that experimental approach. You have your foundations, your principles that you work with, and you start to exploit them, but manipulate them, not exploit them, but manipulate them to see, there may be some innovations that come out of this. I really encourage that, because I think that is like the essence of a renaissance, right? You get collaboration, you get experimentation, and you get innovation. Like, that's so cool. You're advancing your knowledge, right? And then, especially when you get something that works, you're like, hey, try this out. And a new person who's not exposed to this will go, oh my God, this works. And like, great, there's evidence that our testing, our experimentation, and created an innovation. Here's evidence that it's working, right? So I love that. I think that's so cool.
Amen to that, man. It's a yogi is a scientist. It's the holy science, as Yukteswar would say. It's a trial and error, really, within our own being. Yes, we do have outside science and outside data, but ultimately it comes down to the subjective science that one has to weigh within. But I wouldn't want it any other way. I don't think there is any other way. Once you touch upon the way and you start walking the path, there is no other way, in my opinion. Amen
to that.
Amen. Hallelujah. Yeah, man. I think this is a good note to wrap it up at. Do you
Okay.
have any last words? Anything you want to say?
Oh, geez. Um, we covered off that. No, I mean, I really appreciate the time to connect with you. And I've connected with like a few people sort of across, like people I have no idea through the internet. And we have great conversations. And I'm like, whoa, you come back with this background. And I'm like, yeah, here's what I think. And then we have these collaborative discussions about stuff and explore stuff. I love that because it's a really great way to sort of advance my own understanding, to get a sense from other people what's going on. Because I mean, I am in my own thing. I'm doing my own practice, sharing my stuff, but I don't get exposed to the things that you necessarily get exposed to, and so on. So it's really great to have these discussions where we can start to talk about things and get a sense. So yeah, I really
Seriously.
appreciate the time today for that.
Seriously, man, I appreciate it as well. This is my sadhana. This is so
Excellent.
it really is, man. It's a meditative experience to do this with others and tap into their brain a little bit, and we go back and forth like you said. I encourage you to only do it more so, and I encourage anybody listening, if they really want to explore I don't know, the yogic lifestyle. I don't know if I want to say lifestyle, but the yogic path. Um Maybe explore what other people's path are, just an idea. It's very valuable for me, and that's why I do it. And I do share it online with others, and hopefully others get something out of it. Ultimately, this is my path and my journey, and I find it so valuable to be able to connect with people like you from all over the world. It's a sadhana, man. And
That's awesome.
yeah, thank you. It's only possible because of people like you, so I
Well,
appreciate you.
yeah, and certainly, and that's kudos to you for making this available, for making that connection, because I think it's really important, especially at this time right now, where we want to be, talking about this kind of work, that
Mhm.
people can become connected to it, for the benefit of themselves and for others.
For sure, man. Well, yeah, on that note, I don't have anything else to say. I thank you. Thank you for your time, effort, and wisdom. I thank anybody that has listened this long, and keep doing your thing. I wish you all the best.
All right, thanks very much.
Peace and love. Peace and love,
Peace and
everybody.
love, peace and love and harmony.